The roar of the engine echoed across the patchwork of fields below, mingling with the distant crack of anti-aircraft fire. Smoke trailed from burning villages, and the clouds above, tinged with the red of a dying sun, framed the relentless dance of steel birds in the sky. In the cockpit of a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, Lieutenant James Jimmy Harlan gripped the control stick with white-knuckled determination. He wasn't just flying. He was engaged in a deadly ballet, upside down, diving through tracer fire and enemy fighters that seemed to materialize from the very clouds themselves. It was the summer of 1944, over the skies of northern France, and the Allies were pushing deep into territories once held firmly by the Wehrmacht. German Luftwaffe pilots, flying their formidable Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s, dominated the airspace with ruthless precision. Their fighters were lighter, more agile, and, until now, almost impossible to counter in a dogfight. The American Thunderbolts, powerful and heavily armored, had struggled to match the nimbleness of the enemy. Losses were mounting. Missions that should have been straightforward turned into harrowing encounters with death. Yet today, something was different. Jimmy wasn't following the textbook maneuvers drilled into him since flight school. He was attempting something that, on paper, seemed insane. Flipping his Thunderbolt upside down mid-dive, he pushed the propeller to its limits. The paddle blade propeller, a radical design innovation, bit into the air with astonishing efficiency, allowing the Thunderbolt to accelerate beyond its known capabilities. Instruments screamed, wind roared in the cockpit, and Jimmy felt the plane respond as though it were alive. He streaked past the surprised German fighters, leaving them struggling to keep pace. This was no stunt. It was a calculated risk, a revolutionary tactic born from desperation and ingenuity. American engineers had discovered that by altering the design of the propeller blades, the Thunderbolt could achieve speeds previously thought impossible for a fighter of its size. The German commanders, confident in their superiority, could hardly comprehend what they were witnessing. Their lightweight, agile fighters, optimized for tight maneuvers, suddenly appeared sluggish against the newfound velocity of the Thunderbolt. The questions hung in the smoky sky like ominous clouds. Why were these American pilots daring to fly upside down? How could a simple change in propeller design transform a lumbering war machine into a speed demon? And most importantly, could this seemingly minor innovation alter the balance of power in the skies of Europe? As Jimmy pulled the stick back, leveling his plane with deadly precision, the battlefield seemed to slow. Enemy tracers whipped past, some too slow to touch him. He felt the exhilaration of survival and the weight of responsibility. Each successful maneuver wasn't just a victory in combat. It was a validation of human ingenuity under pressure. Engineers, commanders, and pilots alike were about to discover that war was as much about clever adaptation as it was about raw firepower. The stage was set. What had begun as a desperate attempt to keep pace with the Luftwaffe would soon evolve into a defining moment in aerial warfare. A technique that first seemed reckless, flipping, diving, exploiting the unique thrust of the paddle blade propellers, would soon rewrite the rules of engagement. And somewhere in the skies above France, an entire chapter of aviation history was being forged, one upside-down dive at a time. By the end of the day, the Luftwaffe would begin to whisper about this new American trick. unsure whether it was madness or genius. And in the minds of the Allied pilots, a daring question persisted. Could this innovation be the key to turning the tide of air battles forever? By mid-1943, the skies over Europe were a theater of relentless innovation and desperation. The Luftwaffe, once the uncontested master of the air, had honed its tactics over years of combat, wielding fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190 with surgical precision. These machines were marvels of engineering, light, nimble, and capable of executing tight turns and rapid climbs that made them lethal adversaries in dogfights. Allied pilots, particularly those flying the early versions of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, found themselves at a tactical disadvantage. The Thunderbolt was an anomaly in itself, a heavy, muscular fighter with armor plating designed to withstand punishment and a radial engine that produced tremendous raw power. But against the agile Luftwaffe machines, it often felt like trying to wrestle a panther with one arm tied behind your back. Early encounters were brutal. In missions over northern France and the Low Countries, American squadrons reported significant losses. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, one of the emerging tactical minds in the 56th Fighter Group, lamented that their planes, though fast in straight lines, couldn't dance like the enemy, leaving pilots exposed in critical moments of a dogfight. The tactical playbook of the U.S. Army Air Forces, USAAF, emphasized high-altitude formations, diving attacks, and energy retention, principles designed to exploit the Thunderbolt's strengths. But against the Bf 109's superior turning radius, or the FW 190's rapid roll rate, these doctrines frequently failed. Encounters that were supposed to establish air superiority instead became exercises in survival. Pilots reported a haunting familiarity with failure, dives that ended in collision, climbing maneuvers that were outmatched by German acceleration, and entire squadrons pinned down by seemingly minor miscalculations. In response, the USAAF began to experiment with unconventional solutions. Engineers at Republic Aviation, led by aerodynamicist Alexander Kartveli, examined every facet of the Thunderbolt's design. The radial engine was reliable, but created drag. The airframe was resilient, but cumbersome. Kartveli and his team understood that to counter German agility, they needed to exploit the Thunderbolt's untapped advantage: sheer velocity in a straight line. It was here that the paddle blade propeller emerged as a radical answer. By redesigning the shape and pitch of the blades, engineers discovered that the Thunderbolt could accelerate to speeds previously thought impossible for such a heavy fighter, reaching nearly 470 mph at low altitudes, outpacing the FW 190 in certain conditions. Meanwhile, pilots like Jimmy Harlan and his comrades were undergoing a subtle shift in training. Flight instructors encouraged experimentation, stressing that innovation in maneuvering could turn a disadvantage into a tactical edge. Some pilots remained skeptical, wary of flipping their aircraft upside down or pushing engines beyond official limits. Yet others saw opportunity, a chance to redefine the Thunderbolt from a lumbering behemoth into a predator that could dictate the terms of engagement. The broader strategic context only amplified the pressure. The Allied push through France and the Low Countries required air dominance not just to protect bombers, but to ensure the success of ground operations. Fighter groups were stretched thin, flying multiple sorties a day, facing the same Luftwaffe units over and over. Intelligence reports revealed that the Germans, confident in their aerial superiority, often underestimated the adaptability of American pilots. This miscalculation would become pivotal. Key figures began to emerge as champions of ingenuity. Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke and Major Paul W. Pappy Gunn were among those advocating for aggressive testing of unorthodox tactics. They encouraged younger pilots to push boundaries, sometimes in the dead of night, away from the prying eyes of skeptical command. These experiments were not without risk. Several aircraft were lost during test dives, and engine failures loomed as a constant threat. But the potential reward was undeniable. In the shadow of these calculated risks, the stage was being set for a tactical revolution. The Thunderbolt, once outmatched in the delicate dance of dogfighting, was about to discover a strength the Germans had never anticipated. By embracing speed and daring maneuvers, American pilots would challenge the assumptions of aerial combat, using engineering innovation not merely as a tool, but as a weapon of psychological and strategic advantage. The question that lingered over every briefing room and airfield was clear. How could the seemingly cumbersome Thunderbolt, with its armored frame and radial engine, suddenly become a predator capable of outpacing and outmaneuvering the Luftwaffe's finest? The answer lay in a combination of human audacity, engineering ingenuity, and the courage to defy conventional wisdom. A combination that would soon send shockwaves through the German command and redefine the skies over Europe. By late 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a critical juncture. American fighter groups, though increasingly experienced, faced a series of humbling defeats that shook confidence to its core. Despite superior numbers, the Thunderbolt squadrons were being outmaneuvered by the lighter, faster, and more agile Luftwaffe aircraft. Each mission brought the same bitter realization. Conventional tactics were failing, and American pilots were paying the price. One particularly harrowing engagement took place over the skies near Arnhem, where a squadron of the 56th Fighter Group encountered a formation of FW-190s guarding a vital supply convoy. Lieutenant James Harlan recalled later that the German fighters struck with devastating coordination. The Thunderbolts, attempting standard diving attacks, found themselves trapped in tight turns they were never designed to execute. Several pilots were downed within minutes, their planes torn apart by precise bursts of enemy fire. The Luftwaffe pilots, confident in their supremacy, exploited every weakness, and the Americans were forced into retreat. Stories of failure were not isolated. In the Ruhr Valley, another mission ended in near disaster when a group of Thunderbolts was assigned to escort bombers. The Bf-109s appeared almost magically from cloud cover, executing split-second maneuvers that left the American pilots scrambling. Many experienced the chilling sensation of helplessness as their supposedly powerful aircraft seemed sluggish and unresponsive. As one veteran put it, "It was as if the enemy had anticipated every move we were trained to make." The human cost was staggering. Morale began to falter. Pilots returned from sorties physically unharmed but psychologically scarred, haunted by the sight of comrades falling from the sky. Commanders felt the pressure mounting from multiple directions to maintain air superiority, protect ground forces, and ensure the success of bombing campaigns deep into enemy territory. Yet the tools and tactics available seemed inadequate, leaving them in a tactical stalemate that threatened to stall the Allied advance. Amidst this crisis, debates raged in briefing rooms and airfields. Veteran pilots questioned whether the Thunderbolt could ever match the nimbleness of the German fighters. Engineers argued over the limits of the aircraft's power plant and aerodynamics. Some commanders feared that any radical experimentation would lead to catastrophic losses. The conventional wisdom, high-altitude formation flying, energy retention tactics, and standard diving attacks, was failing to produce results. It was during this period of uncertainty that an urgent need for innovation became undeniable. The very survival of squadrons depended on new thinking. Major Paul W. Pappy Gunn, known for his unorthodox strategies, began advocating for testing maneuvers that defied traditional logic. He proposed radical ideas, exploiting the Thunderbolt's heavy weight and engine power in ways that the enemy would never anticipate, including inverted dives and sudden bursts of acceleration. Even the engineers at Republic Aviation, led by Alexander Kartveli, sensed the growing desperation. The paddle blade propeller design, initially intended to improve climb rates and reduce drag, was now being considered as a potential game-changer in combat. If properly utilized, the Thunderbolt could achieve velocities that would allow it to dictate engagements on its terms, rather than being forced into defensive reactions. Yet skepticism was rife. Pilots worried about structural integrity, engine strain, and the terrifying prospect of flipping a 10,000-pound fighter upside down at 470 meters. Despite the danger, the need for bold action could not be ignored. The deadlock of the skies had created a crucible of innovation. Pilots who survived the initial onslaught began experimenting in isolated conditions, testing maneuvers beyond the standard playbook. They inverted their aircraft, pushed engines to their limits, and explored how the paddle blade propellers could be harnessed to gain unexpected bursts of speed. Each test was a gamble with life itself, yet the potential reward, a decisive edge over the Luftwaffe, was too great to ignore. The pressure was not merely technical, but profoundly psychological. American pilots had to confront fear, the instinct to survive, and the ingrained training that dictated safety and caution. Overcoming these mental barriers became as critical as mastering the aircraft itself. Each failure, each near miss, drove home a stark truth. Conventional methods could no longer win the air war. To survive, to turn the tide, someone had to step into the unknown and invent a new way to fight. And it was from this crucible of fear, loss, and relentless pressure that the first sparks of a revolutionary tactic would emerge. A daring maneuver that leveraged both engineering brilliance and the audacity of pilots, willing to defy everything they had been taught. The Thunderbolt, once seemingly trapped by its size and weight, was about to discover an unexpected path to dominance in the sky. A path paved by courage, experimentation, and the extraordinary capabilities of the paddle blade propeller. The breakthrough didn't come from a high command directive or a meticulously planned engineering protocol. It came from the cockpit, a place where split-second decisions could mean life or death. In late 1943, Lieutenant James Harlan and a handful of his comrades began experimenting with maneuvers that seemed insane to the uninitiated. Inverted dives, sudden high-speed sprints, and precise vertical flips that leveraged the newly optimized paddle blade propellers of the P-47 Thunderbolt. The idea was deceptively simple. The Thunderbolt's heavy frame and radial engine made it sluggish in traditional dogfights. But in a straight-line dive, its raw power could exceed the speeds of even the nimblest German fighters. By flipping the aircraft upside down, pilots could maximize thrust, reduce drag in unconventional ways, and catch the Luftwaffe off guard. The first attempts were terrifying. Pilots felt the strain on every component of the aircraft, the roar of the engine a constant reminder that any miscalculation could be fatal. Yet those who survived began to see the method's promise. Major Paul "Pappy" Gunn was among the first commanders to recognize the potential. During a briefing, he encouraged a select group of pilots to refine the maneuver under controlled conditions. The Thunderbolts were flown over uninhabited areas, inverted dives executed repeatedly, and speeds pushed toward the aircraft's absolute limits. Engineers monitored stress levels on the airframe, while pilots took meticulous notes on handling, acceleration, and control response. Skeptics warned that pushing the plane upside down at 470 mph was courting disaster. But the results were undeniable. The maneuver worked. The Thunderbolt became, for the first time, not just a lumbering workhorse, but a speed monster capable of outpacing and surprising enemy fighters. The first operational test came in the bitter cold skies over northern France in early 1944. A small squadron of Thunderbolts, led by Harlan and Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, encountered a formation of FW-190s escorting German bombers. With nerves taut and hearts pounding, the pilots executed the inverted dive tactic. As they flipped upside down and plunged into a high-speed attack, German fighters were caught completely off guard. The Thunderbolts surged past with a velocity that no enemy aircraft could match in the immediate response. Tracers zipped past, but for the first time, American pilots weren't merely defending. They were dictating the fight. The results were spectacular. Within minutes, several enemy fighters were destroyed or forced into evasive maneuvers, abandoning their bombing escort and leaving targets vulnerable. Observers on the ground watched in disbelief as the Thunderbolts, previously seen as cumbersome and slow, executed maneuvers that defied all conventional wisdom. For the Luftwaffe pilots, it was a shock. A lumbering American plane, previously easy to predict, now moved with unprecedented speed and aggression, turning the tables in seconds. The breakthrough was more than tactical. It was psychological. German pilots, accustomed to exploiting the agility of their aircraft against slower adversaries, suddenly found themselves reacting to moves they hadn't anticipated. The Thunderbolt's new capabilities sowed confusion and hesitation, giving Allied forces a decisive advantage in air engagements. For the American pilots, each successful dive built confidence and validated the risk they had taken. Commanders were initially cautious, concerned about potential mechanical failures and the extreme demands on the aircraft. But as reports poured in detailing victories that had previously been impossible, skepticism gave way to cautious approval. The tactic became known within the fighter groups, not as a stunt, but as a legitimate method to leverage the Thunderbolt's raw power against a historically superior opponent. Training programs began to incorporate these maneuvers, and the paddle blade propeller, once a technical footnote, became the key to a radical shift in aerial combat. By mid-1944, the Thunderbolt's inverted dive tactic had evolved from an experimental maneuver into a cornerstone of Allied air strategy. Pilots who had once been at a disadvantage were now capable of dictating the terms of engagement. German commanders, for the first time, faced an adversary whose ingenuity, courage, and engineering advantage combined to produce an aircraft that could match, and sometimes surpass, the agility and speed of their best fighters. The breakthrough was not just about technology. It was about human ingenuity daring, and the willingness to challenge conventional thinking in the face of overwhelming odds. The Thunderbolt, transformed by paddle-blade propellers and audacious pilots, became a symbol of adaptability, a reminder that in war, victory often favors those who are willing to take risks no one else dares to try. By mid-1944, the impact of the paddle-blade propeller and the inverted dive tactic began to reshape the air war over Europe. The once predictable Thunderbolt had transformed into a formidable predator, capable of challenging even the most experienced Luftwaffe aces. Reports from multiple squadrons highlighted dramatic shifts in air engagements. Missions that previously ended in heavy losses were now executed with remarkable efficiency. One striking example occurred during the Allied advance through northern France in the summer of 1944. A mixed formation of Thunderbolts, using inverted dives and high-speed passes, intercepted a group of FW-190s protecting a convoy of German armored vehicles. The American pilots, exploiting their newfound speed advantage, struck with devastating precision. Within minutes, several enemy fighters were destroyed, the convoy's defense obliterated, and American ground forces were able to advance with minimal interference. This operation was quickly hailed as a testament to tactical ingenuity, demonstrating how innovation could decisively tilt the balance in a single engagement. The new tactic had psychological effects as well. German pilots, initially dismissive of the Thunderbolt, began reporting bewilderment and frustration. Enemy communications revealed confusion. "These Americans are flying like nothing we've seen," one Luftwaffe pilot noted in a field report. "Their planes accelerate past us in ways that defy logic. Traditional tactics are useless." The effectiveness of the maneuver forced the Luftwaffe to reconsider its approach, adapting formations, increasing vigilance, and attempting to anticipate the unexpected. Yet for all their adjustments, they were often reacting too late. The initiative had shifted irrevocably into Allied hands. However, the victories were not without cost. Pushing aircraft to extreme speeds placed tremendous strain on engines, airframes, and propellers. Pilots occasionally misjudged dives, leading to mechanical failures or near-fatal recoveries. Lieutenant Harlan himself narrowly avoided disaster when his engine faltered during a high-speed inverted pass. These incidents underscored the delicate balance between audacious maneuvering and operational risk. The new tactic, while powerful, demanded absolute precision, courage, and intimate knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities. Training programs evolved rapidly to mitigate these risks. Squadrons conducted simulated combat exercises, emphasizing situational awareness, coordination, and careful execution of inverted dives. The technique required not just daring, but discipline and teamwork. Pilots learned to read enemy behavior, anticipate reactions, and time their maneuvers to maximize speed advantage while minimizing exposure. Over time, the tactic became standard operating procedure, transforming the Thunderbolt from a heavy hitter into a versatile, fearsome fighter, capable of dominating multiple theaters of air combat. The operational successes extended beyond individual dogfights. Entire campaigns benefited from the new tactic's integration. The Thunderbolt's ability to strike quickly and unexpectedly disrupted enemy air cover, allowing bombers to reach targets with fewer losses and facilitating smoother advances for Allied ground troops. Intelligence officers noted a steady decline in Luftwaffe morale as pilots increasingly feared unpredictable American maneuvers. Strategically, the balance of air power shifted as American pilots gained the upper hand in engagements that had once seemed hopelessly imbalanced. Yet even in victory, lessons were learned. Commanders remained cautious, aware that over-reliance on a single tactic could invite countermeasures. Engineers continued refining propeller designs, airframe durability, and engine performance, ensuring that the Thunderbolt could sustain its advantage without catastrophic failure. Pilots were reminded that innovation carried responsibility, the difference between success and tragedy often measured in milliseconds and inches. By the end of 1944, the Thunderbolt had earned a reputation that resonated across both sides of the conflict. The paddle blade propeller, coupled with audacious maneuvers like inverted dives, had transformed the perception of American air power. A plane once dismissed as too heavy and slow had become a symbol of ingenuity and adaptability, proving that tactical creativity could redefine the rules of aerial combat. The consequences were clear. The combination of engineering brilliance and fearless execution not only saved lives and won battles, but also reshaped the strategic landscape. The Thunderbolt's evolution reminded both allies and adversaries that in war, as in life, innovation, no matter how improbable at first glance, can be the decisive factor between survival and defeat. As the war edged toward its final chapters, the legacy of the Thunderbolt and its audacious pilots was already cemented in the annals of aviation history. The paddle blade propeller, once a technical curiosity, had proven to be a transformative innovation. It had allowed a seemingly cumbersome aircraft to defy expectations, outpace enemy fighters, and execute maneuvers that had previously been deemed impossible. More than a mechanical improvement, it symbolized the power of human ingenuity applied under the most extreme conditions. For the pilots who dared to push their Thunderbolts upside down at hundreds of miles per hour, the experience left an indelible mark. Lieutenant James Harlan, Major Paul Pappy Gunn, and Colonel Hubert Zemke became not only practitioners of a new aerial doctrine, but also living symbols of courage and calculated risk. Some survived the war to share their stories, mentoring new generations of aviators and inspiring engineers to continue innovating. Others paid the ultimate price, their sacrifices underscoring the peril inherent in every leap into the unknown. The broader impact on aviation was profound. Engineers took lessons learned from the Thunderbolt's paddle blade propellers and inverted maneuvers, applying them to post-war aircraft design and performance optimization. Tactics that were born from necessity evolved into formalized doctrines, influencing fighter strategies for decades to come. The Thunderbolt's metamorphosis demonstrated that technology and human audacity could work in tandem to overcome apparent limitations, a lesson that extended far beyond the boundaries of wartime Europe. Philosophically, the story of the Thunderbolt invites reflection on the nature of innovation and courage. In war, conventional wisdom can be a cage, restricting action and creativity. Those willing to challenge assumptions, embrace risk, and explore untested ideas often become the catalysts for profound change. The inverted dive tactic was more than a clever maneuver. It was a manifestation of a mindset that refused to accept defeat as inevitable. It reminds us that ingenuity often thrives in adversity, and that boldness, when combined with skill and knowledge, can alter the course of history. The Thunderbolt's legacy is thus twofold. It is a story of mechanical brilliance and tactical genius, and a story of human determination. Every dive into enemy skies, every heart-pounding moment of inverted flight, speaks to the courage required to step beyond the familiar and seize opportunity amidst danger. In this light, the paddle blade propeller becomes more than metal and design. It becomes a symbol of transformation, illustrating how small innovations can ripple outward to create monumental consequences. As the sun set over the European battlefields, the Thunderbolts would continue to roar across the skies, leaving trails not just of smoke and fire, but of inspiration. The German Luftwaffe, confronted by a new breed of American fighter, had learned an invaluable lesson. Underestimation is dangerous, and ingenuity in the hands of the bold can change the tide of war. In the end, the story of the Thunderbolt reminds us of a simple truth. In both war and life, progress favors those who dare to fly against convention, who embrace risk with intellect, and who transform limitations into advantages. The daring dives, the technological breakthroughs, and the courage of pilots like Harlan and Zemke echo far beyond the skies of Europe, leaving a resonant message for all who face seemingly insurmountable challenges. True innovation often comes from those willing to defy expectation, and the rewards of such bravery can echo through history long after the engines have gone silent.